Sound okay? Okay. So I'm going to talk about innovative systems for extending our growing season, which we desperately need in South Dakota. My name is Shannon Mutschelknaus. Usually folks don't say my last name. Just call me Shannon, but it's pretty long. So I'm a mechanical engineer. That's the main thing I do. I also have a small farm. So I've done mechanical engineering, focusing a lot on HVAC, heating, cooling, calculating, estimating solar heat loads and stuff for electronic display systems, for displays all the way around the world. You probably see some. There's some of our product here in Pierre. If you watch football or other sporting events, we have a lot of displays in stadiums and stuff in all over pretty much every country. But I've always had a big desire for growing stuff, mostly fruit trees. I worked for conservation districts in several counties when I was younger in high school, planted tens of thousands of trees in shelter belts in Brule and Buffalo County and Hutchinson County, maybe some trees for some folks here. So anyway, through work I've traveled a lot and experienced a lot of different fruits and vegetables that in South Dakota we have no idea they even exist. And so really one of the things I really enjoy doing is leveraging that mechanical engineering knowledge to make it possible to grow those types of fruits and vegetables in our climate. And there's just so much opportunity for ways to do that and ways to do it better than we're able to do it today. So I operate a small farm by Brookings, South Dakota. We're about 7 miles northeast of Brookings. We grow a lot of super hot peppers. I've got several customers that grow peppers for hot sauces that they sell at farmers markets and in grocery stores and stuff around the world. So I really enjoy super hot peppers because they're a little bit harder and more difficult than regular bell peppers. In the passive solar greenhouse that I have today, that I've had for probably 3-4 years, there's actually kind of a little picture of it in the image there. We grow passion fruit. How many folks here have had passion fruit? Got one? Yeah. It is really delicious. I love it. But this is what purple passion fruit look like. You've probably had the juice in fruit drinks, tropical fruit punches. It's a lot of times in there, but it's really rare to ever see the fresh fruit. We also have sheep, about 40-50 head of Jacob sheep. They look like this. Most folks think they're goats, but they are actually sheep. As well as we have Scottish Highland beef that we raise and sell on our farm. But we'll be talking mostly about greenhouse stuff today. So I'm going to cover a bunch of different topics. I wasn't sure how interested folks would be, how well versed you'd be in all the different things out there. So I probably won't go very deep technically, but I'll cover each of these a little bit and some of the pros and cons of the different systems that are out there. We'll talk about high tunnels because almost everybody knows what those are, and so it's kind of a nice benchmark to compare other things to. Earth sheltered greenhouses, which we had one presentation on earlier, and then Chinese solar greenhouses, and then the deep winter greenhouse designs. Then I'll cover a little bit of a previous research project I did under a SARE grant in 2019, and then I'll give an introduction to the new specialty crop block grant program project that we got a grant award for just this year and have been started and working on design for that. So we live in South Dakota, which is a challenge. Our weather is very severe, some of the most severe in the world. We can go to places like Siberia and see more severe climates, but we're pretty cold and pretty hot. So our growing season here is quite short for a lot of the state, depending on how much risk you want to take. If you want to stay in the 100% chance of not having frost, we have maybe 100 growing days in most of South Dakota. If you happen to live by Custer, you're lucky when you get 80 days of growing frost-free. So that really limits the amount of specialty crops that we can grow. For example, the super hot peppers I showed you are a 90 to 100 day crop before the fruit are ready. So doing it outdoors, I'm really living on the edge when I do that. Maybe another fun fact, I'm not sure how many folks know this, but we have the world record for fastest temperature change in the world. This happened in spearfish, actually, and was in the newspaper back in 1943 on January 22nd. We had the fastest temperature change where it went from -4 degrees up to 45 degrees in just a matter of 2 minutes. And as far as I can find, we still hold the world record on this in South Dakota, so it's kind of cool. But plants don't like that, our animals don't like that, and we don't like it. So some of the ways we can deal with that, the high tunnels, a lot of folks have probably heard about these. They've been around for many years. A lot of times it might be called a hoop house or a polytunnel, grow tunnel, really diverse. One of maybe the key points, key features that makes it high tunnel is that it's considered a temporary structure. And that's important to note. Supposedly you can move them. Not very many people do or have, but they are considered temporary. They consist of steel tubing with polyethylene films typically. Usually people are using them with minimal or no energy inputs, but people do heat them. We have a grower locally to me that uses the double layer polyethylene and natural gas to heat it. But within the last year, the fuel prices are too high. And so he can't do that anymore, or at least not until the prices go down. So some of the benefits of high tunnels, they protect plants from a lot of things. So even if they don't extend your growing season, they are an awesome growing tool. They protect you from weather, from hail. I think I talked to several people that talked about their hailstorms and how it's still punctured through the plastic, but the crops are still good. They also can provide some protection from pesticides and herbicides. If you have dicamba drift, they will lessen the damage to some extent. And they will provide you with a slight growing season extension. NRCS fact sheets gives you 2 to 4 weeks of growing extension that'll give you versus growing outdoors, which, depending on what you're growing, that can be critical. And most importantly, is it results in higher quality produce. If you've been growing in these types of structures, the produce you grow looks pretty, and that matters, especially if you're going to a farmer's market where everybody buys stuff with their eyes. Maybe it doesn't have the best taste, but if it looks good, that's what people buy on, and so that's what you really do need to have. And so a high tunnel will protect it from the elements, and your crops will look a lot more blemish-free. Some of the drawbacks, depending on what you're growing, you might have to be cautious with pollination. Some types of fruits, you might need to put in a little bit of extra effort for pollination, make sure that pollinators can get into that high tunnel. Or some folks will actually have bees that they order, bee boxes to do that pollination. But if you're growing leafy greens, you don't have to worry about pollination. Of course, insects can be a difficulty. Usually aphids are probably the #1 problem that people have growing under any type of structure. Any folks in here with the high tunnels or structures had aphid problems? Yeah. It's probably one of the biggest challenges, and it's kind of an interesting topic. Aphids are born pregnant, which is an interesting fact. So they reproduce really fast, and outdoors they're not a problem. Wind, sunlight, everything kills them. But when you're growing in a protected area, they grow super fast. And our season extension is fairly limited. So for example, as part of the current research project, I've been monitoring some temperatures in a local high tunnel for comparison's sake to what I'll be building. And it's kind of a fairly standard high tunnel structure with a double layer inflated polyethylene film, which gives you a little bit better insulation value than just the single layer. And last fall, I was comparing that to my growing system that I was using outdoors, which is just some low tunnels with frost covers. And in our location, we had our first killing frost for peppers on September 28th. Interestingly, the frost covers and the high tunnel gave us the same amount of season extension of 11 days until we had another cold spell that was a killing frost outdoors. So 11 days is maybe a little bit short, but if you think about it's going to extend both your early part of the season and the late part of the growing season, you can get in that 2 to 4 weeks, like the fact sheets say. Earth sheltered greenhouses. There's a lot of different variations out there, and you'll see a lot of different names for these. Sometimes they're called pit greenhouses. You'll see wallopinis. You'll see the greenhouse in the snow design, which is the most popular one that a lot of folks will have. And that's what this here is a greenhouse in the snow design. This is located by Bruce, South Dakota, which is maybe 10 miles north of Brookings or so. Of course, they're a permanent structure because you have to dig out and excavate. So usually they're not, you can't get the same sort of government grants and financing for them. They're a steel tubing, again, covered with a polycarbonate glazing versus the polyethylene films. The big reason is because the polycarbonate is more durable and it gives you a better insulation value than the films do. So you can grow year-round in some areas with this kind of a structure. They're typically heated with what's called low-grade geothermal. I'll cover what that is a little bit on the next slide. And for a lot of South Dakota, you still have to have some supplemental heat if you want to get through the full year without having freezing temperatures inside. Usually folks do that with some propane or electric heat, and it's usually only for the months of December and January, maybe February, that you'll have to have some supplemental heat in here. This person, they end up using quite a bit of electric supplemental heat, which is they weren't really expecting going into it, but we're by Brookings and it's pretty cold and pretty cloudy, and so if you're in a sunnier part of the state, these will do better. If you're in a warmer part of the state, like the Southwest, part of South Dakota is probably like the prime spot where using this type of grow structure is going to do very well. There's a few different ways that low-grade geothermal is installed. This top illustration shows a system that John Bartok put together at the University of Connecticut quite a few years ago and published some studies on how that went. And then there's this type of structure or system is what's used with the citrus and the snow design, where there's just a single trench that's dug, which is much more cost-effective for excavation, but it doesn't quite have the performance that you could get out of something like this. But it's always a trade-off of cost versus benefits, and so a lot of folks do this system here in method. So what is low-grade geothermal? It uses the natural heat that's accumulated in the ground throughout the year and extracts that. So what happens is you blow air from inside your greenhouse structure through those tubes, through the ground, and it picks up the heat that's in the ground and brings that back to your structure. If you dig down 30 feet, the temperature of the soil is constant year-round. And it is typically the temperature, your annual air temperature you have at your climate. So if you're in southern South Dakota, you might see ground temperatures that are 50 degrees. Where I'm at by Brookings, it's usually like 43 to 45 degrees at that depth. If you go farther north, of course, our ground temperatures are even lower. So what that means is that air that you're pulling back in could be heated up to what that ground temperature is. Usually, you can't afford to dig down 30 feet. That's pretty crazy to do that with a trench. So usually these are done like 8 foot, maybe 10 foot. And so you're not quite at those temperatures, and you will see difference in the air temperature that you'll get throughout the year. So in the fall, you're going to be able to get some warmer temperatures out of the ground, and by now, this time of year, those temperatures in the ground have dropped some amount, maybe down to 40, maybe 45, depending on what you started at. The key thing with low-grade geothermal is just using the natural temperature of that ground that's accumulated throughout the year. Here's a nice view of what the inside looks like. Some of the benefits of these: you can get a much larger increase in your growing season. If you want to do a little bit of supplemental heat, you can grow year-round, and you can grow plants that you cannot grow outside at all. For example, here we've got some avocados, we've got peaches, figs. Citrus is a very popular one. A lot of citruses are subtropicals and can grow in these really well. That's probably what they're advertised the most for being really good at. And it's awesome to be able to have fresh fruits like oranges and limes throughout the year. Some of the drawbacks, of course, it has to have a permanent site. You can't move this around. The initial costs are, of course, much more than a high tunnel is going to be. And in a lot of South Dakota, you're going to have a little bit of supplemental heat. So if you want to think about that and prepare for that. Unlike Nebraska, where these are used predominantly, they can get by without any supplemental heat. In a lot of South Dakota, especially where I'm at, or Aberdeen to the north up by Sisseton, you're going to need to have some supplemental heat. But again, it depends on what you want to grow in it. So if you want to grow cold season crops, they're not going to need supplemental heat. I think one of the biggest challenges, depending on what it is you're growing, is the layout. So if you're growing, say you just want to grow tomatoes, this is going to be a little bit restrictive. With any structure, you want to be able to use every square foot of space that's under cover, so you can get really good efficiency out of that. You paid a lot of money for every square foot of structure you built. And so it's a little bit harder to do that because you're not going to have, with tomatoes, you usually want 6 to 8 feet for vining length to do the trellising and stuff. And it's a little bit tough to do that and have rows of tomatoes spaced out very well. If you're doing shorter crops like that in the front, this works really great, and a few in the back, and you can have taller stuff in the middle. So if you're doing a diverse variety of things, this can be a really nice layout. But if you're doing one of something that's maybe tall, it can be something to consider. And the other big thing is these are less effective the farther north you go. So one of the next categories that I'll cover is systems that store excess heat. Anybody had a high tunnel that's overheated? If you've had a high tunnel, it's probably overheated. So here's an example again with the same high tunnel just last month. This is on February 7th. The gray line here is what our outdoor temperatures were this day. Got up to actually a pretty warm day for us in February this year of 37 degrees. And in the high tunnel, we got up to 93 degrees. The system didn't have any ventilation operating. It wasn't growing in it this time of year, so not running the ventilation fans. But you get 56 degrees of temperature rise above the outside air temperature. These structures are really solar collectors. That's really what you want them to do. You're collecting that sunlight energy to grow plants. but it can also be used as a source of energy, of heat energy. And so what if we can take that energy, instead of just dumping it out the vents, what if we can store that for later use? So there's a whole bunch of techniques and strategies that people have been trying for years to do this successfully. I don't know if there's one that's won, so maybe there's not a perfect option yet, but there's a lot of different ways you can go about this. I thought this data was a little bit interesting too, because the high tunnel temperature inside actually was below the outside temperature for a little while at night. I think that's because it's just been so cold in the ground and everything is just cold, and so it's actually a little bit cooler than outdoors. And so first one we're going to cover that uses some amount of heat storage is the Chinese solar greenhouse. This is probably the most widely used across the world because it's relatively simple. It consists of a north wall that is used as a thermal mass to store sunlight energy. And it's fully passive. It doesn't take any energy to store that heat. So the sunlight shines onto the back wall. There's many variations of this. This one is a packed earth. There can be concrete. There can be a lot of other things that people put together. But these are pretty simple structures. The sun shines through the glazing onto the back wall, heats it up during the daytime, and then a thermal blanket rolls down over the glazing structure at night. Especially by us, our night lengths are really long, and so we lose a lot of heat at night. And so if you can cover that up, you're going to save a lot of energy, and then you can get by without having to use any sort of heating system at all. These things are all over the place in China. We'll show kind of a little graph here. Starting in the 80s, they really invested heavily in the technology and did a ton of research on optimization of the shape of the structure, the thickness of the heat storage medium, all kinds of those details. And up until 2010, there's nearly 2 million acres under these kinds of growing structures in China. It's just kind of mind-boggling, the quantity of them that's out there. So I put together this little video to give a little bit of perspective on how widespread this growing system is. So in Shenyang here, there's quite a few of them. Usually they're kind of around the perimeter of cities where there's large population centers to feed folks. And they're all over, just many, many acres of these. And it's just incredible. So when you hear 2 million acres, what does that mean? But looking at the satellite images, that's what it is. So this structure can be successful. So could we use these in South Dakota and be successful? So a lot of the research publications say these things are awesome for working within these latitudes. This is really where they use them, between 32 degrees north to 43 degrees north. That's great. Where are we? Oh, shoot. So close, so close. Looking at the temperatures for Shenyang, a lot of them, their average temperatures in January, February, not a lot different than us. But where we really struggle with this is we have some really severe temperatures sometimes. So, we have lowest recorded temperatures of 41 degrees in January and in February, and that is a lot lower than -20. So, I do think that these structures could be successful in our climate, especially for cold season types of produce. So, but I have not seen them in South Dakota. There is one fella in Alberta, Canada, that has, and he happens to be Chinese, so he was able to order and procure one from China, and He does not grow tomatoes year-round. For one, the daylight length is not long enough for us, so they're not going to grow just due to the length of daylight. And he still does see freezing temperatures for his location. But one of the most difficult things with these is snow and the glazing blanket and being able to retract that.
And then do you see, like, in the areas where they would work in the United States, do people use them?
I haven't seen them, and I think a lot of the problem is you can't buy them.
Oh, okay.
You know, nobody's making a structure of this shape. The closest thing is the citrus and the snow, really. It's not much different than this as far as the shape of it. So that's probably the closest thing to this, but these are usually level with ground. They're not below grade. Some of the drawbacks, it is a permanent site to build that, and it's going to cost more than a high tunnel no matter what. And oh, can you hear me now? Okay. Yep. Okay. Very good. Okay. So in our climate, this system I think will require supplemental heat from all the papers and stuff that I've seen on the topic, and they're not readily available in the United States. And they're retractable thermal blanket. How do you deal with the snow on this? I have talked to Chinese folks that use these in China, and I wasn't really understanding what they were explaining. So they sent me some videos, and I should have put it in here, but they go up there with shovels and they shovel the snow off the top. Like they can walk on it and shovel the snow off. It's like, in China, you can do that, but not in the United States. So there's some different paradigms in different countries, but you know, dealing with that I think is one of the bigger challenges with this. So in covering the deep winter greenhouse, this here is the deep winter greenhouse version 2.2. Free plans are out there on University of Minnesota's website. You can check that out. Dan, the architect that put the drawings together, did a great job. And there's a deep winter greenhouse group on Facebook that you can join if you have questions. And Dan will answer, I'll probably answer, and a lot of other folks. And there's quite a few of these in Minnesota. They're really cool. Maybe one key point is they are optimized for winter growing. So the factory or the drawings that he has will not have enough cooling if you want to use this during the summertime. So you want to modify it a little bit to ventilate more if you want to grow year-round. But they're really designed for wintertime growing of leafy greens, and it works awesome for that. You'll see a lot of growers, mostly in Minnesota. I don't know if I've seen many in South Dakota. I can think of only one, I think. So this system takes the extra solar energy that you get during the daytime, and it stores that heat energy in the ground below the structure. So there's really two ways of doing that. The deep winter greenhouse, the one shown on the previous slide, uses a rock bed heat storage system. So the air comes into this tube, blows through this manifold, blows through the rock bed, and then comes out of the ground on the other side. The other alternative option is to use a soil or earth-based heat storage system. This is a picture of mine that I put together in 2019. In this case, because you can't blow air through the ground, through the soil, you put in 4-inch perforated tubes to blow that air through. And they're spaced fairly close together and work really good. The rock bed is nice. It can store more heat than soil can, and that's really probably the main advantage. But I've seen most folks kind of going away from this because of the cost and availability of clean rock. It's tough to get that, and it costs a lot of money. And then it does limit where you can grow. So if you have a rock bed system, you can't grow in the ground. Whereas with a soil-based system, you can do whatever you want for growing. You can grow in the ground, you can grow in pots, you can do whatever you want. You can do some of both, which is what I do. And really the biggest benefit is that it's less costly than the rock bed. And it doesn't store quite as much heat. It depends a bit on what your soil moisture is. So if you're growing in the ground, you're probably watering the ground. And because you have that water in the soil, your heat storage capacity is going to be relatively high. Maybe if it's pretty wet, it's going to be actually higher than rock. But usually you're not going to be watering it to that level. So it's a little bit less heat storage per square foot or cubic foot than rocks. So this is the system that I put together in 2019. I was going for making it as low energy as possible. So it's got the grid of tubes below it, and then it also has passive venting. If you've been growing in structure, you know it gets insanely hot in there. And I was just really concerned about electric usage and then the reliability. If we have a power outage during the summertime when it's sunny out, the temperatures in there can skyrocket to 130, 140 pretty quickly. Even in December, it can get to that temperature if you're not cooling. So I went with these passive vents, which they're actually just doors that are mounted horizontally. And the bottom ones, I don't have those on any type of automation. I just open them up during the summertime. It's really the only time I need them. But the upper vents, usually starting about mid to late February, the heat storage system here cannot store the heat as fast as the sun provides it. And then you have to start venting some of that excess heat. And so those I have automated thermostat controlled actuators. And I did a bunch of webinars with Master Gardeners Group and Specialty Crop groups and University of Minnesota over the years on this topic. And they're kind of scattered about on YouTube. So if you go to my website, you'll find some links to them, so it's a little bit easier to find where those videos are at. So if you want the 6 to 8 hour version of this, you can go there and sleep well. So the heat storage system, this is actually how I built it originally. I changed this up, but it has a hot air intake at the top, fans on the back wall, blow down into a grid of tubes at the bottom, and then exhaust that heat up here at the other side. And one of the things I found is that it's not necessary to pull that hot air in from up above. It's actually not as hot up there as it is lower down, so I moved that. And if you want, I can explain why that is later. So this here's just the data from 2020 and how stuff performed. The dotted line here is our outdoor air temperatures, with the blue and red being the daily highs and the daily lows that we saw outdoors, and then what it did indoors. So I started recording temperatures here on January 1st. That was really when I got all the wiring done and stuff was actually functional. So I went into this winter without any stored heat in the ground below, just what naturally accumulated. And we happened to have the cloudiest January on record that year, which maybe was convenient for getting good quality data, showing maybe what worst case looks like. So I did have, our clicker doesn't work anymore. No, don't shut down in 10 minutes. All right, we've got 9 minutes and 34 seconds. Okay. So our coldest part of the year got down to 29 degrees in here. And I was very careful, maybe because I'm an engineer and I wanted really good data, make sure I had no other energy sources, no lights, no grow lights, nothing else electrical putting out any heat, so I could see just what the worst case would get to. And that's where we got down to. And it was fairly cold that night. We had, minus 17-ish or something. And I got the roof vents functioning here in late February. You can see inside the temperatures were hitting above 100 a few days. I was surprised they couldn't store it fast enough. And so just kind of goes to show how much sunlight heat energy is going on. There's a lot. And throughout the year, I actually didn't use the lower vents at all until August, was really when it started to get warm enough out that I was like, I really should start using these. But I would say every year since this, I've been using the lower vents with them open every year. Maybe a little bit for the cooling, but more so because I wanted pollinators to be able to come in and take care of helping with some pollination. With peppers and tomatoes, they're mostly wind pollinated. You don't really need them, but I have a lot of other bizarre exotic things like naranjilla and other things that we could talk about if you want. And those do need pollinators, and so I was sick of doing the pollinating, so I leave the vents open when I can to let them come in and do that stuff. So then really this fall is when I got to really see how warm that climate battery could keep stuff and for how long it could do that. So starting here, I had the thermostat set to come on at 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and it would maintain that at night up until about late October sometime. And then I set the thermostat a little bit lower because I monitor the temperature of the ground below the structure to see when I'm consuming and using up that heat energy. So I can conserve it by not calling for heat too soon. So then I maintain it at 50 degrees for really up until December, maybe first, second week of December. We'll keep at 50. 50 is kind of a sweet spot where a lot of plants will keep growing just fine. With peppers, I grow some of the super hot peppers, and peppers, fun fact, they're actually perennials, which I did not know this. And they will live for many years if you can prevent them from freezing. However, if they spend too much time below 50 degrees Fahrenheit, they will go dormant. And so that's why that's kind of a sweet spot to try to keep it above that, because they will keep growing if you can keep them from going dormant. And then late in December, our day length is really short and not as much solar energy is available. Then I usually set the thermostat down to 45. That's when it kicks in and starts to pull heat up from the climate battery. So total heating electricity cost ended up being $65 for a winter, or about 15 cents per square foot for the whole winter, which is pretty awesome. So some of the benefits of these, of course, you get a much longer growing season than a high tunnel, possibly year-round for some types of crops, very minimal energy inputs, they're durable, very good long-term operation. Drawbacks, you gotta have a permanent spot, and the cost is really a big drawback. They usually cost quite a bit. This system here was about $20,000, and I did all the labor and stuff, so it's really just materials and supplies and stuff for it. So that's quite a bit per square foot. If you're comparing that to a high tunnel, it's going to be way more. So we got a few minutes left, so I wanted to share a little bit about this cool new research project we're working on. The title of the project is Increasing the Economic Viability of Year-Round High Tunnel Production in South Dakota's Climate. So really, I showed you a lot of different concepts and ideas, and there's really some great ideas in a lot of them. What if we could take some of that and combine that into a system for our climate and be able to grow year-round or close to year-round? So this is is kind of what we've got. So the first big feature here is I want to improve the shape of the structure to maximize the solar heat and minimize the heat loss for our climate, for our latitude. And so that's really what this shape here is for our latitude at 45 degrees north. Gives us kind of the best of the winter sun angle on December 22nd. This is at high noon. This is where our sun is at 22 degrees. You want to design the height of the structure and the slope of this back wall so that the heat storage medium here in the back gets direct sunlight for that part of the year. And you want to take into account the summertime because you want to still be growing stuff in the summertime. In June, July, at noon, our sun is at 70 degrees above the horizon. And so it's sized so that the sun is not shining on the heat storage medium because we don't want extra heat at that time of the year. And to maintain portability, which I think was probably one of the more challenging things to figure out how to do that. I'm using these concrete blocks. You guys maybe seen these. A lot of our concrete places will make these. They have forms. They're 6 foot by 2 foot blocks, and they weigh a lot, 4,000 pounds a piece. But they can store a lot. And the cool thing is their thickness is almost perfectly in line with the amount of heat that you will receive daily and reject at night. So the heat conduction hits that surface and should get a really good cycle for heat storage. Any more thickness than that is not necessary, and less thickness than that will be not as beneficial. So this here's a CAD model of the structure and what that looks like. There's still some refinement that I have to do on it. But kind of gives you a feel for what the high tunnel frame will look like. And what if that's not enough heat? It's probably not going to be enough heat. What if we combine that with the in-ground heat storage system? How could that work for us? So I'll have that designed and put below the ground. I don't maybe have great CAD drawings of that yet, but in some of the fluid dynamic simulations and stuff that I did with the previous structure and showed that there's some challenges with uniformity, and there's a lot of different fields of thought on there as to what airflow is optimal through that. And so as part of this study, I'll be doing controlled experiments and really refine the guidelines that are out there for what's the best airflow rate and spacing for the tubes and stuff below the structure. What I'm actually going to be doing is having a manifold-free design. So a lot of these designs, you'll see one big tube here that distributes the air to all the small tubes. And it is very expensive. The 4-inch drain tile tubes are pretty cheap per foot because they're used everywhere, but those manifolds are really expensive. And then also planning to do the retractable blanket. This is probably the most challenging part and might fail, but working with a few different folks that are doing research on these in the United States and trying out things, and hopefully sometime this summer they'll have learned what not to do and I can do what works, but maybe not, and maybe I'll be doing the experimenting. So I've only got seconds left before this shuts down. This is just where we're at with the design. I've been doing a lot of computational fluid dynamics stuff, looking at the airflow stuff, did structural engineering simulations for the snow load. That stuff's done. Doing benchmarking of some existing systems in our area to compare to. Still working on some details of the framing design, and now we're going to sleep. So, yeah. So planning to start building this summer, if summer ever comes. I'm not sure anymore. It's feeling like winter keeps going and our snow keeps accumulating by us. I see there's not much snow around here. I don't know why I live by Brookings. My wife questions it every year. So, anyone have any questions?
tried bees and haven't had a lot of great success. Would it be possible to like keep a hive in there year round, or was it too hot, or would it not work?
I'm not a bee expert, but there's some challenges with bees. Honeybees, definitely no.
Okay.
And the reason is the glazing materials block out wavelengths of light that they need for their eyes to function correctly. And so honeybees will not go into high tunnels very well, and they definitely won't live and stay in there. So what people use are bumblebees. So if you order a box of pollinators for your high tunnel or whatever greenhouse structure you have, there are patented varieties of bumblebees that you can get for pollinating your crops.
See bumblebees in my high tunnel.
Really?
Yeah, I've had some move in.
I just see it.
Yeah. I've seen a few of like the big bumblebees burrowing and living in there. So bumblebees are probably one of the potential options.
Okay.
I could log in and show more pictures, or we can ask questions. If anyone has questions, you can definitely email me, message me. You can follow the project on our Facebook page, on Instagram, and then we have a website as well.
What would you suggest to someone that's new starting and wanting to do any of the methods, high tunnel, earthen, looking at them all? What would you recommend to someone brand new looking at?
I would start by asking you a lot of questions about what it is you want to do, why you want to do it, what kind of things you want to grow, when you want to be growing. If you want to do leafy greens, the deep winter greenhouse is great, especially if you want to do that in the wintertime. That's the way to go. On the University of Minnesota website, they have some designs for the farm scale deep winter greenhouse, which is larger than this. I think that was kind of like the first thing that they got feedback on. I was like, oh, this is too small for commercial production. So they have a farm scale deep winter greenhouse. Definitely check that out. And the plans are all free, and he's got a whole bill of materials of things that you could get for that. And then in those newer plans, Dan has put in different options. So if you wanted a rock bed, he's got the drawings and designs for that. If you wanted in the ground system, he's got the drawings for that. And I did the calculations for it, so I should advertise it too. So that's a really good reference. And if nothing else, you can use that as a starting point and tweak it to what you want to do. If you want to grow other things, it really depends. And it depends on where you're located. Surprisingly, South Dakota has actually a pretty big range of climates, so that matters. If you are in the Southwest, the citrus and the snow is a great option, especially if you have your groundwater is low enough that you can dig that out and do an in the ground system. And if you want to do a diversity of different crops, that's a nice option. So, but they all have pros and cons. That's why they all exist, is because they have different strengths and weaknesses.
I have two questions. First one with the feeding, where we're at, we do have like artesian wells. Could that be used to do it? Or like we also, we did a wood furnace. Is that an option to pump into it as well?
Yeah, there's ways to do both of those things. So if you have a source of groundwater that is pretty cheap, you can use a water source heat pump. So that basically you pull that water out of there, and the heat pump will even concentrate it. So say that your water temperature is only 45 degrees, but you want 90-degree air, your heat pump can do that. It can pull that energy out of the water, and you'll have electricity to run the heat pump, but it's plus that energy you got out of the water. So you get over 100% efficiencies on that. And people can even do that for their homes and stuff. What was the other option?
And then we have a wood furnace.
Wood-fired. Yep.
We use
Yep.
it for our house
Yeah, yep. If you have a hydronic heat system in your house, that could be plumbed out to your structure. Usually with wood, if you were putting the wood burner in your greenhouse, the problem with wood is it burns hot and it burns fast, and then it's out. So what people do in those situations is they add a water tank as a heat storage system. So your boiler will put that hot water into your hot water tank, and then your radiators or whatever you're using in the greenhouse will just pull from that when it needs the heat, so that it can run continuously all night without you being out there putting wood in it.
And then second question, kind of going off of like the beginner, is there anything like that shows the diagrams of planting, and this is just me being lazy and not wanting to do the math, and like what you could expect for like for market and what profit?